When my friend's mom pulled me into the pantry and whispered, "Don't make a sound," I didn't realize that silence would change everything between us. I'd been in that house more times than I could count. It was the kind of place that stopped feeling like someone else's home years ago. Shoes by the door, the soft creak in the hallway floor, the faint smell of brewed coffee that always lingered no matter the hour. It was familiar in a way that made you relax without thinking about it. She opened the door with the same warm smile she always had. My friend's mom. Calm, welcoming, effortlessly put together. Nothing dramatic about her appearance, just a quiet confidence in the way she stood, the way she met my eyes without rushing past the moment. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands framing her face, and she wore something simple that somehow looked intentional, like she'd dressed for comfort but never stopped caring. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. As I walked past her, our shoulders brushed, barely enough to register. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. But this time, I did. The contact lingered in my awareness longer than it should have, like my senses had suddenly tuned into a frequency I'd been ignoring. The kitchen was filled with late afternoon light, soft and golden, spilling across the counter and catching dust in the air. She moved easily through the space, pouring coffee, straightening something that didn't need to be straightened. There was a quiet rhythm to her movements, practiced and unhurried. Watching her felt different than it used to. Not inappropriate, just observant. I noticed things I never had before. The way she listened when I spoke, really listened, her head tilting slightly, her expression open and patient. The way her laugh was gentle, controlled, like she'd learned long ago not to let it spill out too freely. There was warmth there, but also something restrained, something careful. She asked about my classes, my plans. Questions that carried genuine interest, not polite obligation. When she handed me a mug, her fingers brushed mine. This time, it wasn't an accident. Not intentional either, just one of those small, human moments that meant nothing and everything at once. Her hand was warm. Steady. For a second, our eyes met. Not awkward. Not rushed. Just held long enough for a thought to surface that surprised me. She's not just my friend's mom. The realization made me uncomfortable immediately. I pushed it away, told myself I was reading into nothing. She'd always been kind. Always been attentive. Nothing had changed, except me. Still, the awareness lingered. In the way my posture straightened without meaning to. In the way I became conscious of how close I stood, how her presence seemed to fill the room more than before. There was no tension yet, no spark I could point to, just a subtle shift, like the air before a storm you don't know is coming. I told myself it was just familiarity playing tricks on my mind. That comfort sometimes blurs into something else if you stare at it too long. But as she leaned lightly against the counter, sunlight catching the side of her face, I had the quiet, unsettling sense that something unspoken had already begun, without either of us choosing it. It happened quickly, so quickly that I didn't have time to question it. We were still in the kitchen when the sound of voices drifted in from the front of the house. Unfamiliar voices. Laughter, the shuffle of shoes, the unmistakable sign that someone had arrived earlier than expected. I felt my shoulders tense instinctively, glancing toward the hallway. Before I could ask who it was, she was already moving. Her expression changed, not alarmed, but alert. Decisive. "Come with me," she said quietly. She reached for my wrist, her fingers wrapping around it with a gentle firmness that made hesitation impossible. The touch wasn't rough or rushed, but it carried intent. She guided me down the short hallway, past the laundry room, to the narrow pantry tucked beside the kitchen. I barely had time to register where we were before she stepped inside and pulled me in after her. The door closed softly behind us. The space was smaller than I expected. Shelves lined both walls, stacked with jars, boxes, and folded paper bags. There was just enough room for two people to stand, barely. I shifted my weight automatically, and in doing so, realized how close we were. Too close to ignore. She raised a finger to her lips, her eyes meeting mine in the dim light. "Don't make a sound," she whispered. Her voice was low, controlled, calm in a way that made me want to mirror it, even as my pulse quickened. I nodded, more aware now of the way my back brushed the door, the way her shoulder was inches from my chest. Then the voices grew louder. Footsteps moved across the kitchen floor just beyond the thin pantry wall. Someone laughed again, close enough that I could hear the breath behind it. The house that had felt open and warm moments ago suddenly felt small, enclosing. My world narrowed to the quiet space between us. I could hear her breathing. Slow. Measured. She wasn't panicked. If anything, she seemed focused, careful not to move, careful not to let the shelves creak or the door shift. I tried to do the same, but every sensation felt heightened. The faint scent of her perfume mixed with the dry smell of spices and cardboard. The warmth of her body so close to mine that I could feel it without touching. My arm hovered awkwardly at my side, unsure where to rest without brushing against her. At one point, she shifted slightly, just enough to give me more space. Her hand brushed my forearm as she did, lingering for half a second longer than necessary. Not intentional. Not accidental either. Just human. Our eyes met again in the dimness. There was something unspoken there, a shared awareness of how strange this moment was, how intimate it felt without meaning to be. Her expression wasn't startled or embarrassed. It was thoughtful. Steady. As if she, too, was registering the closeness but choosing not to react to it. The voices outside continued, oblivious. Time stretched in that narrow pantry, seconds pulling long and thin. I held my breath without realizing it, afraid that even the smallest sound might break the fragile stillness. And in that silence, with her standing there, so close, so composed, I understood that this wasn't just about hiding anymore. Something had shifted again, quietly, unmistakably. The pantry stayed quiet, but it wasn't empty. Every sound from outside felt amplified, the dull thud of footsteps moving across the kitchen, the clink of a cup being set down, a voice rising briefly before fading again. Each noise reminded me how thin the wall was, how easily we could be discovered standing there, close enough to feel each other's presence without touching. I became aware of my breathing and tried to slow it, matching the calm rhythm of hers. She seemed completely composed, as if she'd stepped into this moment already knowing how to exist inside it. Her shoulders were relaxed, her posture steady. The confidence in that stillness grounded me more than I expected. The space was tight, but she shifted slightly, careful and considerate, angling herself so I wasn't pinned awkwardly against the door. It was a small adjustment, almost imperceptible, yet it carried intention. Her elbow brushed my side, and this time neither of us moved away. We both noticed it. We both chose not to react. The silence pressed in, not uncomfortable, but heavy with awareness. I could see her face more clearly now as my eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the crack beneath the door. Her expression was thoughtful, eyes focused somewhere just past me, as if she were listening not only to the sounds outside but to something internal as well. There was no panic in her features. Just control, and beneath it, something quieter. Something human. My heart was beating faster than I wanted it to. Not from fear, but from the closeness, from the strange intimacy of sharing a secret moment neither of us had planned. I wondered if she could hear it, if she could feel the subtle tension in my posture the same way I felt the warmth radiating from hers. At one point, her hand lifted slightly, as if to steady herself against the shelf behind me. Her fingers hovered near my shoulder before resting there, light and careful. The contact was brief, grounding. It wasn't possessive or suggestive, just a quiet acknowledgement of space shared too closely to ignore. I swallowed, keeping my eyes on hers. For a second, she looked at me directly. Really looked at me. Not the polite glance of a parent figure, not the distant smile of familiarity, but something more searching. As if she were seeing me not as someone's son or someone's friend, but simply as a person standing in front of her. The moment passed quickly. She looked away first, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, like she was reminding herself of something important. Outside, laughter erupted again, closer this time. She leaned in just slightly, not touching, but enough that her voice could stay low. "Almost done," she whispered. The words were practical, but the softness of her tone made them feel personal. Reassuring. I nodded again, unable to trust my voice. The pantry felt warmer now. Or maybe I was just more aware of it. The scent of her perfume lingered between us, subtle but unmistakable. Every second stretched, filled with thoughts I didn't want to examine too closely. Questions about what this moment meant, if it meant anything at all. And yet, in that silence, something unspoken settled between us. Not a promise. Not a decision. Just an understanding that this closeness had been felt by both of us. When the voices outside finally began to move away, the relief I expected didn't come immediately. Instead, there was a strange hesitation, like neither of us was quite ready to let the moment end. The voices outside drifted farther down the hallway, fading into the background noise of the house. A door opened somewhere, then closed again. The tension that had wrapped itself around the pantry slowly loosened, but neither of us moved right away. It was as if we were both waiting for an invisible signal, something to tell us it was safe not just to step out, but to let go of what had settled between us. She was the first to move. With careful ease, she reached past me and turned the knob. The pantry door opened just enough for light to spill in, soft and sudden, washing over the shelves and catching in her hair. For a brief moment, she paused there, half in shadow, half in light. Then she stepped back, giving me space. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just one word. Steady. Normal." I stepped out into the kitchen, the familiar room feeling strangely altered, like returning to a place you know well after something subtle has shifted. The air felt cooler out here, more open. Behind me, she closed the pantry door gently, the sound soft but final. We stood there for a moment, not quite facing each other, not quite looking away. I leaned against the counter instinctively, grounding myself in the solidness of it. She moved to the sink, picked up her mug, and took a slow sip as if nothing unusual had happened at all. But everything had. The afternoon light had shifted while we were gone, stretching longer across the floor. Dust motes drifted lazily in the air. Somewhere in the house, the visitors were talking again, but it sounded distant now, like background noise to a conversation that hadn't started yet. She set the mug down, her fingers lingering around the handle. "They won't be long," she said, more to fill the space than to inform me. I nodded. "That's fine." Our eyes met then, briefly, but deliberately. There was no panic in her expression. No embarrassment. Just a quiet awareness that mirrored my own. We both knew the pantry hadn't been nothing. And yet, neither of us reached for language to define it. She leaned against the opposite counter, folding her arms loosely, not defensively, just comfortably. The posture made her seem relaxed, but there was a carefulness beneath it, like she was choosing her stillness instead of falling into it. "I didn't mean to startle you back there," she said gently. "You didn't," I replied. And it was true. If anything, the moment had left me more alert than shaken. Another pause followed. Not awkward. Measured. The kind that invites honesty but doesn't demand it. She smiled then, not the warm, welcoming smile from earlier, but something softer. Quieter. "You handled it well." The words stayed with me longer than they should have. Not because they were flattering, but because of how sincerely she said them. As if she'd been watching me, noticing how I moved through the moment, how I carried myself. I shifted slightly, aware again of the space between us. Not large. Not small. Just enough to feel intentional. For the first time since stepping out of the pantry, I felt the full weight of what had happened, not as tension, but as possibility. Something had passed between us that couldn't be returned to silence, even if it wasn't spoken aloud. The pantry door remained closed behind us, unremarkable and ordinary. But the moment it had held lingered quietly in the kitchen, present in the way we stood, the way we spoke, the way neither of us rushed to leave. The house settled into a quieter rhythm after that. The visitors moved into another room, their voices lowering into a distant hum, giving the kitchen back its calm. It felt like a small pocket of stillness had opened just for us, unplanned, fragile, but real. She was the one who broke the silence. "You know," she said thoughtfully, her gaze resting somewhere between the counter and the window, "I forget sometimes how much things change." I looked at her, waiting, not pushing. She seemed to appreciate that. She always spoke more freely when she wasn't rushed. "Change how?" I asked gently. She smiled at that, the corner of her mouth lifting in a way that wasn't playful, but honest. "People grow up," she said. "And suddenly you realize you're still standing in the same place, but everything around you feels different." There was no self-pity in her voice. Just reflection. She brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, a small, habitual gesture, and leaned back against the counter again. Not far from me. Close enough that I could feel the quiet pull of her presence without it crossing into anything else. I nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to understand that," I admitted. Her eyes met mine, and this time she didn't look away. There was recognition there. Respect. As if she saw not just my words, but the effort it took to say them honestly. "You're very thoughtful," she said. "More than you realize." The compliment wasn't flirtatious. It felt earned. And somehow, that made it land deeper. We talked then, softly, carefully. About school. About expectations. About the strange pressure of becoming something before you're sure who you are. She shared small pieces of herself too, not regrets, not confessions, but truths. About learning to be strong for others. About how quiet loneliness can sneak up on you even in a full house. As she spoke, her hands moved subtly, opening, folding, resting together again. I noticed the way her shoulders eased the more she talked, like setting something down she'd been carrying for a while. At one point, without thinking, I reached out and rested my hand lightly over hers. It was instinctive, comforting. The kind of touch meant to reassure, not claim. She didn't pull away immediately. Her hand was warm beneath mine. Steady. For a brief moment, we stayed like that, two people acknowledging something deeper than words. Then she gently withdrew, not abruptly, but with intention. A boundary drawn softly, not out of fear, but care. "That's kind of you," she said quietly. I nodded, understanding more than I could explain. The air between us shifted again, not with tension this time, but clarity. Whatever connection had formed wasn't about impulse or secrecy. It was about recognition. About seeing and being seen in a moment that asked for maturity from both of us. She straightened, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I'm glad we talked." "Me too," I said. And I meant it. There was no rush to define anything. No need to. The conversation itself felt like the point, a bridge built carefully, plank by plank, with respect on both sides. And as the quiet settled back into the kitchen, I realized that intimacy doesn't always ask for more. The quiet that followed our conversation felt different from before. It wasn't heavy or uncertain, it was reflective, like the kind of silence that comes after something important has been said. The house continued on around us, but the kitchen seemed suspended in its own calm, untouched by the rest of the noise. She glanced toward the hallway, then back at me, as if checking whether we still had a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, more deliberate. "There are moments," she said slowly, "that ask more of us than we expect." I knew what she meant. Not just about the pantry. About everything that had followed. "I've been thinking about that," I replied. "About how some connections don't fit neatly into anything." She studied my face, searching, not for reassurance, but for understanding. When she found it, her shoulders eased slightly. "It matters how we handle them," she said. "Especially when they surprise us." She stepped a little closer, not into my space, but nearer than before. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence again, familiar now rather than overwhelming. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then rested lightly over mine where it lay on the counter. The touch was brief, intentional, gentle. Her fingers didn't press or linger too long. It felt like a question rather than a statement. I didn't move my hand away. I didn't tighten my grip either. I simply let it be what it was, a shared acknowledgement of something real, balanced carefully between us. She looked down at our hands, then back up at me. Her expression was calm, but there was vulnerability there too. The kind that comes from choosing honesty over comfort. "You're important to me," she said. "And that's why this has to be thoughtful." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in my chest. "I respect that," I said. "I don't want this to be something that feels wrong later." A small smile touched her lips. Not relief, gratitude. She withdrew her hand then, slowly, leaving behind the faint echo of warmth. The absence of the touch felt deliberate, meaningful. Not a loss, but a choice. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The understanding had already taken shape, clear and unforced. Whatever was between us didn't need to rush forward or retreat into denial. It simply needed care. She exhaled quietly. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "Not just today. In general." The words stayed with me. They weren't romantic in the traditional sense, but they held something deeper: appreciation, trust, a quiet bond formed not from impulse, but from shared restraint. "I'm glad too," I replied. We stood there, side by side, the space between us now defined not by tension, but by mutual respect. The pull hadn't disappeared, it had been acknowledged, shaped, given boundaries that made it feel safe rather than dangerous. And in that moment, I realized something important. Choosing what something means doesn't always involve grand declarations or dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it's about knowing when to pause. When to step back without turning away. The evening unfolded quietly after that, the way it always did in that house. The visitors eventually left, their goodbyes echoing briefly through the hallway before the front door closed and the familiar calm returned. Dishes were rinsed, lights were dimmed, the day gently folded in on itself. Nothing dramatic happened. And somehow, that felt exactly right. When it was time for me to leave, I stood near the doorway, slipping my shoes on more slowly than necessary. Not because I wanted to prolong the moment, but because I was aware, deeply aware, that this was a kind of ending. Or at least, the close of something that had quietly formed. She walked me to the door. The porch light cast a soft glow across her face, catching the lines that spoke of experience rather than age. She looked composed, but there was a tenderness in her expression that hadn't been there before. Not uncertainty. Just care. "I'm glad today happened," she said, breaking the silence. "So am I replied. The words came easily now. Honest. Settled. She nodded, as if that confirmed something for her. "I think," she added gently, "some moments are meant to stay just as they are. Not pushed forward. Not erased." I understood what she was offering, not distance, not denial, but perspective. "I won't forget it," I said. "Not in a way that feels heavy. Just meaningful." Her smile widened slightly at that. She reached out, hesitated for a heartbeat, then rested her hand lightly on my shoulder. The touch was familiar and new at the same time. Warm. Grounding. A quiet goodbye without finality. "Take care of yourself," she said. "You too." For a moment, neither of us moved. The space between us felt full, not of longing, but of something resolved. We had acknowledged what passed between us without letting it become something careless or hidden. There was dignity in that. Strength. She leaned in and kissed my cheek, brief, gentle, affectionate in the most human way. When she pulled back, her hand lingered for just a second longer, then dropped naturally to her side. As I stepped outside, the cool night air felt sharper, clearer. I turned once more, and she was still there in the doorway, watching with a soft, thoughtful expression. Not regret. Not promise. Just understanding. The drive home was quiet. My thoughts weren't tangled or restless. Instead, they felt settled, like something important had found its place. I knew the connection we shared wouldn't turn into a secret or a story told in whispers. It would live differently than that. As something that taught me patience. Respect. The power of moments that don't need to become more in order to matter. Some connections change you not by how far they go, but by how carefully they're handled. And long after that evening faded into memory, I carried with me the quiet certainty that what we shared, however brief, however restrained, had left a lasting mark.